I'm not teaching, I'm publicly learning. Hi and welcome to Learning for Life in UK test part 433 or 43. While doing leg stretching, and if you participate in the leg stretching, let's set your arms. Let's go to the first exercise. We're bringing one leg in front with the heel onto the ground, and we're pulling the toes in. And from time to time, we're going to contract the quad muscles. So we're starting with contraction of the quad muscles. So we can be asked, for example, in the test, if a statement is true or false. So we might gonna ask something about the Bill of Rights, and then we have to make the correct answer. That it is about the power between the Parliament and the power the King has. But the power of the King is limited. And we're releasing the contraction, but we're keeping the stretch. Or we're gonna ask, is it true or false that the Barrett report is about the basis of a modern welfare state? And that is true. You should also think about who was monarch or prime minister at the time of key events. I think we know it every time they talked about it. And we're contracting it. It was just not so good to see, but it's not that hard to see here. So we're just going to learn that this tableau here good. And we're releasing the contraction, but we're keeping the stretch. The timeline in the appendices at the back of this book help by summarizing the different historical periods. The UK courts take some time to understand the differences between criminal and civil law. You also need to understand which courts deal with certain offences and how they vary in their processes, in particular the differences between countries in the UK. How they vary you should know about Scottish courts even if you are taking the test in London. We're contracting it. What are we doing? No, we're going to do it another time. So we're just going to learn these two big tableaus good. With criminal courts and civil courts, but we are already pretty close. You should also take the time to learn some of the more specific details of the criminal and civil courts. For example, the number of members in the jury, it's 10 or 15 in Scotland. Or the maximum amount that can be claimed in the small claims procedure. 10,000 in England, 7,000 in Scotland and 5,000 in Ireland. Now it was 10,000, 5,000 and 3,000. 10,000 in England, 5,000 in Scotland and 3,000 in Northern Ireland. In Wales also 10,000. Question styles. You should expect facts and the test to be presented in a different way to the study materials. And we're changing the leg. The other leg in front. The heel onto the ground. And we're pulling the toes in. And we're starting with contraction of the quad muscles. You should expect facts and the test to be presented in a different way to the study materials. Of course. That's why I'm going so often over these things, not just the facts at the end, but explain it in a different way, from the other way. For example, you might be asked, is the statement below true or false? So you might be asked for a date if in that decade the hovercraft was in. I actually don't know it right now. I think, I don't want to say it wrong, as I said in the last part. So let's go fast to hovercraft. It was Sir Christopher Crawford who invented the hovercraft. We're releasing the contraction, but we're keeping the leg there. Where was it? I think it was by the red pages. But that's why we're going over it. Now we're lacking on one specific point. The times. By some things. It was in the 50s. So they might gonna ask for a decade, was it in that decade that hovercraft was invented, and we have to know it was in the 1950s. And we might be also asked, is the Chancellor of the Exchequer doing that? And the right answer would be economy. But I'm going to go to it also. Okay, it's written here. You need to know that the hovercraft was invented in the 1950s and that the Chancellor of Exchequer is responsible for the economy. And we're releasing the contraction, but we're keeping the stretch. If you learn the materials like a script, you may find certain questions difficult. Learning the materials like a script? What does that even mean? For example, as well as being asked, what is Roger Bannister famous for? And it was the running. You may be asked, who ran the first 4 miles? Yes, I said it. Who ran the first 4-minute mile in 1954? We might going to ask it completely differently. We're going from that, and we're just going to ask who ran it. So we're having all these data and try all the time to take them from different directions. So Roger Bannister, he ran the mile 1954 under 4 minutes. So who ran the mile under a minute as the first Briton? Roger Bannister. When did the first Briton run the mile under a minute? 1954. So we're learning it from all different directions. If you learn the materials like a script, you may find certain questions difficult. We're contracting for last time. For example, as well as being asked, what is Roger Bannister famous for? You may be asked, who ran the first 4-minute mile in 1954? Or instead of, when the woman first given the right to vote, you may be asked, why is 1918 an important date in the history of women's rights? And no, 1918 did women get at least the right if they are older than 30 years old to vote, which was still discriminating and not the same as men. It followed in 1928. So you are being tested on your understanding of a subject covered in the materials rather than your ability to memorize facts. No, I haven't paid attention. I was thinking about the leg stretch. We are done with the leg stretch. We're bringing the leg to the outside. The toes are pointing in front. And that is the ankle chain stability test. And we are taller with the third back. And we're pressing a bit into the ground. You are being tested on your understanding of subjects covered in the materials rather than your ability to memorize facts. To some extent, maybe enough for most people to say something like that you are being tested on your understandings of the subjects covered in the materials than on your abilities to memorize facts. I would say no. This is not understanding. But okay, for most people it might be sufficient. A question might include dates alongside other facts and ask you which are correct. For example, you might be asked, which famous female novelist born in 1775 wrote novels concerned with marriage and family relationships? Now there are 4 answers and the right one is Jane Austen. This question requires you to know that Jane Austen wrote novels that are concerned with marriage and family relationships, but also to be aware of when she was born. But it happened before, but I stumbled about when in the middle of a sentence. Because I find it a bit unusual to formulate a sentence like that. So, we did it all. I said it every time to Jane Austen. And we're releasing the stretch a bit, but we're giving the leg there. The key is that you should expect to be tested on a whole topic and not single facts. You can't just learn that Jane Austen wrote Pride and Prejudice. You must learn when she lived and what her novels are concerned with. When she lived, they mean the time frame. They said not dates and birth. You have to know about everything they said. We have to know broadly the time. You must understand, however, yes, what was the numbers? I think they're writing there something which they tried not to tell with a whole section. Now we're pressing again into the ground. Now in that question, they gave everything. They told us when born and what about family, marriage. We know that we have to know the broad time frame. 1775, okay. Understanding is crucial. The most important thing is to make sure you read and understand all of the materials completely. We have to understand the materials of the subject covered. We're having the leg at the outside, the toes are pointing forward, and we're pressing a bit into the ground, and we're trying to be tall with the main part of the body. Ideally, you should be able to explain the contents of the materials in your own words. But it's not ideally, that is maybe enough to be ideally for the test, but it is in a way the minimum bar. Okay. You should also try and learn how each fact relates to when it happened. You should also try and learn how each fact relates to when it happened. How each fact relates to. I understand what I'm saying, I'm just wondering about the grammar. We are using the stretch bit vocabulary like that. We should understand the facts and how these facts relate to each other. You can test your understanding on different topics by asking yourself questions such as, who was monarch at that time? We're going to use the tableau at the end for these questions. And we're pressing again into the ground. What was the period known as and why? There were not so many periods, right? Interwar period, Second World, Victorian Age, First World War, Interperiod, Reformation, Elizabethan, English Civil War, Restoration. That's pretty simple. But that's a good way to have a broad frame. What were the causes or outcomes of key events? That is not a tip that is necessary for everything here in this book. For example, you should know about Florence Nightingale and the Aishenbad Kingdom Brunel, but also need to think of them as famous Victorians and people who were alive during the British Empire. We have the dates, Crimean War, and also the expansion of all the infrastructure, so Aishenbad Kingdom Brunel and Florence Nightingale. You should know that the Tower of London was built on the orders of William the Conqueror. After the non-conquest wave, they said that it was first built by William the Conqueror. The Tower of London was first built by William the Conqueror. We're doing the last exercise. We're having the leg at the outside, the flexed foot, and we're bringing it up and down. I remember this expression because I think it's a confusing expression. It was first built. Was it demolished and new built? Was it just enlarged? What happened there? Maybe we're going to do something to the Tower of London, but not in this part. We're keeping just with what we have here. Except for these 2 or 3 things which were absolutely necessary and which are missing in this book. So you should know that the Tower of London was built on the orders of William the Conqueror after the Norman Conquest, and that its White Tower is an example of a Norman castle keep. Is keep an architecture term? As well as that, it is home to Beefeaters and the Crown Jewels, and is also the place where Anne Boleyn was executed there for all that previous good land. But with the Beefeaters, and we also called the other name, that was a little probably we're going to go back to that. Of course, that's why we're going through it. That is the thing missing. Beefeaters with one, and there was something else. And last time. Now we have a leg to the outside. Our appendices are designed to help you develop this kind of understanding. A person who has written it has not done this book. This is something which someone would write who has looked in the book, has read it, has understood it, but doesn't really know what it's about. If you look at it and if you read it, that is the impression you get. But it helps you to develop the kind of understanding for the time frames when what happened, in what period, which was. Let's not be so critical. By providing a summary of key information, they demonstrate the associations you should be making between facts. You should use the appendices to supplement your studies. If you only study the appendices, you will not pass the test. Some things have to be said, I think, because it's so obvious, but so many people probably won't learn only the appendices, or even less, and doing nothing of the learning. Do not assume that the test questions will be phrased in the same way as the book. That is why we're going to them in different directions. Or that you will be asked any of the same questions. Yeah, we're not going to get the same questions. You cannot simply learn the practice questions and accept to pass. You must understand the complete study materials. We're in a pretty good way to do it. Clarifications. We're going to do the clarifications in the next part. Aber das wird wel thing with asterisks. Now we don't have time left to continue the leg stretching. We will now go into the, what is it called? The butterfly stretch. Soles of the feet together, tall up and a bit in front. You can hold this position for a minute or so. I thank you very much, and until the next time.